Welcome back, everybody, for another episode of these crazy fools that just keep eating meat and can't shut up about it. My name is Tom. I got the usual suspects, Ray and Justin, with me, and a special guest who's going to tell us all about her story. We've got Jen Donovan with us. She's from, correct me if I'm wrong, it's Whole Body Healing Eugene.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So she's a pal of Bart's. So we figure we better have her on, see what her story is. Because, Bart, he won't get it right. We got to do it for him. Right, Bart? So why don't you tell us how you got started on this journey, Jen, and what is it exactly that you do?
Yeah. I mean, I always kind of had some health issues growing up. Especially even when I was a little baby, like something must have compromised me really young. I had bad reactions to vaccines. I would get these like skin rashes. I was getting like ear infections all the time, things like that. But the doctors never really gave my mom any answers except to just, give like antihistamines or antibiotics or things like that.
I
And
had a lot of ear infections as a child myself. A lot of very
yeah,
painful ear
interesting.
infections. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, like I said, I think I was compromised probably from birth to some extent, but at one point when I was a toddler, apparently I was on antibiotics for about a month when I had a really bad ear infection. So I can just imagine how that really exacerbated issues and just sent me further down this road. Pretty soon I was having food allergies, and it would be like every couple years there would be a new food I would become allergic to. But allergies are so normalized in our society, right? It's like seems like everyone has some kind of allergy, and so it's just kind of like a normal thing to just kind of be like, well, what are your food allergies? Like how can we accommodate you? And so it's not it's not thought of as like an indication of like a deeper issue. Like I never had any idea that a food allergy was an indication of a deeper issue. I always just thought, oh, like some people just have food allergies. So I mean, I grew up with pretty severe food allergies, but thinking that things were normal. I would still get like really bad ear and sinus infections every couple years, do another dose of antibiotics. And when I started going into adolescence, that's when like the mental health stuff started. I started getting really anxious, especially in social situations, but just kind of a low grade, just like constant level of anxiety where I just felt like I couldn't ever feel like totally chill or calm, and that just continued into my young adulthood. But again, like mental health issues are so normalized in our culture that I just thought it was kind of normal. Like some people just have mental health problems, right? Um, and I ended up going into the mental health field actually as a result of that, because not the only reason, but I wanted to understand the issue better. I wanted to help other people who had similar struggles to me, and I wanted to understand myself better. And so I went into that field, and things were really talked about through a like social, psychological, emotional lens, which I think is relevant for a lot of people. It's not that I think that's all wrong or anything like that. Like that's certainly a factor. But I never learned anything about nutrition or lifestyle or anything like that. So I was just kind of going about my life as a young adult. I got my master's degree. I started working in the mental health field, just starting my career. And that's when everything really caught up with me. Before I just kind of had this steady, like, I have some food allergies, I have some anxiety, I tend to get prone to infections really easily. But I thought that was just kind of like normal health problems. I thought I was a pretty healthy person. But when I was 25, I just had this major decline in health that it happened like slowly and suddenly at the same time, right? It kind of felt like I was like the frog in the pot of water, it's like slowly boiling, where all of a sudden I realized that I was just having bizarre symptoms in every system of my body every day. And it got to the point where it was really, really scary. I was getting weird, like red, like flush, like rash areas on my cheeks. I was getting hives on my like neck and chest and face all the time. It seemed like I was just having small allergic reactions to almost everything I ate. Like my throat would get kind of tight and mucousy almost every time I ate food. I was getting a lot of headaches. My hormones got super dysregulated. I was having like really horrible PMS, really horrible menstrual pain. I started getting severe fatigue. Like I was really into like fitness and running and exercise. And suddenly it just got to the point where like, I just had no energy for anything. In fact, I remember getting home from work one day and just kind of going and lying on my bed and just kind of thinking to myself, like, well, I guess I'm like one of these people now that just goes to work and sleeps, and that's all I do because I'm too tired for anything else. And I had heard of chronic fatigue syndrome. It's not that uncommon these days. And so I just kind of, but I didn't really understand what it was. I just kind of heard that people get it. And so I just kind of thought like, oh gosh, I guess I'm one of those people now. This is just my life now. But the thing that really spurred me to try to figure something out was actually the mental health symptoms. Like I said, I had always been, some level of anxious most of my teen and adult life. But things started getting really acutely scary. I was having panic attacks for the first time in my life. I'd always been kind of anxious, but I'd never had panic attacks before. And it didn't, I mean, it's amazing like how physiological it felt. Like it really felt like my heart would just be racing for no reason and that I literally could not get enough oxygen in my body. And it felt like I was breathing, it didn't feel like I was hyperventilating, but it was that air thirst sensation where I just like, it felt like I was kind of slowly suffocating. And I call them dread attacks, what I started to get, where it was, and these were almost more disturbing than the panic attacks, where I would just have this overwhelming sense of dread. Like I had this like deep inner knowledge that like my body was shutting down, and I was getting this like panic signal from deep in my body being like, we can't hold on much longer. And I felt so crazy trying to explain this experience to people because it sounded like I was having some kind of like delusion or psychosis, and I wondered that for a while. I was like, am I really completely going crazy? Because I just could not shake this feeling of like dread just that had come over me. And so it got to the point where it was hard for me to even work anymore because I'd be so distracted when I was, with clients, of just this really visceral experience. And so I really did not want to do psychiatric medications because I'd actually had a bad experience with that as a teenager. So I had already had that experience. And so I really wanted to avoid that if possible. So I thought, I had never really bought into like natural treatments before. I grew up in a really, well, I still live, Eugene is a very like hippie kind of town. And so I'd always, kind of like scoffed at kind of like natural treatments, thinking they're kind of like new age and silly. But I just thought like, well, I don't have anything to lose. Maybe I'll try some kind of natural treatment for my anxiety that I'm having. And so I consulted with an herbalist, and I went to her specifically of like, can I take an herb that might help with my panic attacks, my anxiety? And she asked me more about what's going on. And when I started explaining what I had been diagnosed at that point. She basically said, well, you can treat some of that with nutrition. Like, did you know that? And this just like blew my mind. Because even after I had been diagnosed, like it was always just like, there's no treatment. Like, sorry, you just have this condition for life. And so that just completely blew my mind, and that got me down the rabbit hole, kind of like those Google searches you were talking about, Raymond, before. I just started like, it opened up this whole world to me of like all these people.
What sort of specialist was this that suggested it to you?
It was an herbalist.
Herbalist. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, it just opened this whole world to me and started me down that path. So that's kind of the background of my story.
And how long ago was that?
So that was when I was 26. So gosh, that was when I was about to turn 27. So that was 4 years ago now. Yeah.
So how long did it take you to work your way through the diets before you found something that started working for you, and what worked for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I first discovered this low histamine diet. I don't think I mentioned it before, but the condition that I got diagnosed with was mast cell activation disorder. which is basically like an autoimmune allergic
Right.
disease where your body is just like basically constantly having an allergic reaction to anything and everything, and which explains a lot of my symptoms. They kind of felt like allergic symptoms, like the shortness of breath and the hives and the mucus in my throat and things like that. And even the panic actually is can be elevated histamines. Um, so I started with just a low histamine diet. I didn't really understand the difference between like a symptom reducing and a healing diet at first. I just thought like, if I'm reacting to histamines, I'm going to take possible food triggers of histamine out of my diet. And it did really help. Like I did notice within a few weeks, I noticed a significant reduction in my symptoms, which taking antihistamines or any other thing had never done. Right. So
Yep.
I'm glad that happened because it really hooked me in, because it really told me like, wow, I've just changed a couple of small things and I'm already noticing a change. Like, what does that mean in terms of like potential? Right. So I started out just really doing like a whole foods, low histamine diet. I didn't know a lot about nutrition at the time. Like, I didn't really understand concepts of like nutrient density, or that you could use different foods like really medicinally, right, to actually like heal underlying issues. So I just started as that. And like I said, it did help a little bit, but I definitely stalled. I was still having a lot of reactions that were really unpredictable. I still had really bad chronic fatigue. I was really underweight at that point. I just really wasn't absorbing nutrients well. And yeah, just kind of tired and just feeling kind of icky all the time. And that's when I actually started working with the nutritionist, Mary Ruddick. And she took me into a actually healing diet. Like, she taught me all about the difference between like reducing symptoms and actually healing, right? And so I was still very ill, and I know now that a lot of the root cause of my illness were these chronic infections that I had, probably from my immune system being destroyed by antibiotics for years and years and years. So I had gotten some testing through a naturopath, and so I knew that I had like parasites and bacterial overgrowth and all sorts of nasty stuff.
Candida and things like that.
Yeah. She wanted me to go really slow, which I think is something that a lot of people miss, and part of why they fail with stuff like this is because the detox hits them so hard. I had such brutal overgrowth that I actually had a really significant detox effect, even just from switching to a whole foods diet. Like, I actually got like acutely ill for a couple weeks when I first did it. And that's still like eating grains, like all that kind of stuff. Just like cutting out the processed food made me detox. And so knowing that, she took me through like really cutting back on carbohydrates really slowly, which I'm really glad, because I think it would have been such a shock to my system. But she first, had me cut out grains, and then I started cutting out starchy vegetables, and then I started cutting out fruit. I went really, really slow, and that took me from the time I started working with her about 6 months until I started with the intro GAPS diet, which is the gut and psychology syndrome diet. And she had me do a ketogenic, like very meat-based version of that protocol.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's everything from the sort of detoxing, and I was kind of like, I people all the time like, oh yeah, I'm detoxing right now. I'm drinking all this whatever fruit juice or something, and you're like, oh, okay.
Kombucha. I don't know.
Kombucha
Yeah.
and carrot juice and greens and stuff. And then, you get into the carnivore community and you hear about all these weird stories about people that all of a sudden they have oxalate dumping. And I know in the beginning I was like, what? Really? Is that a thing? It takes a while. And then you meet enough people and you see the evidence and you're just like, wow, it's amazing. And I know a couple of things I kind of stumbled on from reading studies is, and I asked the dentist about this. No, I don't think anybody's going to argue that eating sugar will give you cavities, right? So I asked the doctor, I said, what what's the actual bacteria or whatever that creates the dental caries or bacteria? It's like, oh, it's streptococcus, you know? And I was like, really? So I'm like, it's the same thing that gives you a sore throat, right? Yeah. So no surprise that, infections like that. And then the other one we stumbled onto was Staphylococcus. Staphylococcus hominis lives on your skin, right? And these things, along with candida, all thrive when you eat a lot of carbohydrates, especially refined carbohydrates. So it can give you infections. It can eat your teeth away. It could give you bad breath. It can make, and in fact, that staphylococcus on our skin is the one that produces most of our body odor. Because this is a weird thing we notice is that when people go on a meat heavy diet, they stop stinking as much. Some of us more than others, perhaps, but you know, it's that weird thing. It's like your breath gets better, you have less body odor, and then all of a sudden, you obviously, when you're on a carnivore diet, you're not eating sugar, so and grains and raisins and dates and all those things are really hard on your teeth. So you tend to stop getting cavities and stuff like that. But I don't think it's any surprise knowing what we know now that when you drastically change your diet, all kinds of things can happen, right? Diarrhea, constipation, these sort of detoxification. I think we kind of all clarify that, but you can only imagine if your body's been fighting these infections for decades, and all of a sudden you stop fueling the bacteria because you're not eating the carbohydrates, and they start dying off. Maybe you're detoxifying, or maybe your body is just shifting from this process of fighting these infections to doing something else. And that's what we know happens now with oxalates. It's like, well, the body didn't have the capacity to eliminate the oxalates when there was too many, so it started storing them. And now that you've taken these other loads off of what your body needs to do, and now as the time and the resources to put towards dumping the oxalates and getting them out of the system. And so we hear about people like, yeah, I didn't even know I had kidney stones, but all of a sudden it started breaking up and it was really painful, or all of a sudden, this pain in my big toe went away, and they said it was what you would call it,
Gout.
gout, but we think it was oxalate crystals or whatever, right? So all these wacky things start happening to people when they change their diet, and it's the body just correcting itself, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, so much of this stuff, like, I never would have believed until I experienced it
Yeah,
myself,
it
right?
sounds
Like,
it sounds like woo woo
yeah,
stuff, right? Yeah,
totally. Yeah, yeah. Like, I had an experience with oxalate dumping too, and I could
really.
not believe it. And, I would try to explain to people what was happening, and they would look at me so strangely. It was like, really, like, you will not believe what comes out of your body if you stop eating greens. Like, it's
Yeah.
so weird.
Right. And then you show them the pictures of oxalate crystals in the heart tissue or somebody's brain, and then they freak out, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever
Yeah.
done that, but I think it's in the Weston A. Price book. They show these horrific pictures of oxalate crystals inside of people. It's disturbing to see. And you say, well, that's the byproduct of eating certain plants, is they're very high in oxalate levels. And some people, and a lot of people in the autistic community seem to have a less of a capacity to eliminate things like oxalate. So it's actually a big deal. We don't
Yeah.
know exactly. I mean, I'm not saying that oxalates cause autism or anything like that. It's just we
It's a
know that
factor. Yeah.
statistically they have a problem with this. So
Yeah, and I think you're right. Like, a lot of the effect of detox is like your immune system kind of being like, oh, I have less of this other stuff to deal with, so I can actually address this infection that's just been kind of like low level chronic for so long. And so, like, my hormones turned off. Like, I got even more fatigued. I had such severe muscle weakness. I could barely walk around my apartment for a while. And so I'm really glad that I just had this really deep conviction that this was going to work, that I was going to get through it, because I think otherwise I would have been like, no, I'm getting worse. Like, I need to stop. But I think it really was just like my body put everything that wasn't like essential survival mechanisms, on hold, to like just clear out everything. Because then when I did bounce back, like, I have surpassed, my any health that I ever had before. I've surpassed, you know, and so it is just kind of, there is this like hump you have to get over in that process, depending on how severe the illness you're coming from is.
Yeah, that's a big leap to go from like, well, I'm eating the food they recommend. I mean, fruits and vegetables. Yeah, I'm avoiding meat. I only eat like lean chicken breasts and some fish sometimes, and then you think you're doing it right, and you know, I'm eating whole grain bread, right? Isn't that good for
Yeah.
me? Peanut butter, isn't that good for me? I'm eating
Yeah. I
canola
mean,
oil.
yeah, I went through some like really deep experiences of like betrayal and like processing that, because I mean, you know, I knew I wasn't perfect. Like I would go eat like fast food sometimes, or like, you know, eat ice cream at night, things like that. Like I knew I wasn't perfect, but I lived what I was told was a pretty healthy lifestyle, you know?
Right.
Like I jogged every day and I ate the whole grains and the vegetables. I actually explicitly remember telling a friend once, like, I don't know why I get colds all the time. I eat vegetables every day, you
Right.
know? And so I had to really go through a really big feeling of betrayal. Like, oh my gosh, I did everything right. And like, I got so sick, I almost died, you know?
How many colds do you have now?
Oh gosh. I had like one brief cold for a couple days last year, and like not for like 2 years before that. Yeah,
Isn't
like
that baffling? Isn't that baffling?
rarely. Yeah,
Right.
rarely. And if I do, it's like super mild. I like sleep for a day and I'm fine.
Ray,
Right.
when was the last time you had a cold?
October 2019.
Justin?
What was it, like July of last year or something? Yeah, but you got to understand. So there's so many parallels between us, Jen. That's one of the reasons why I really wanted to have you on. The growing up sick, like, you know, I believe we're about the same age, if not the same age, and you know, the same. I never had ear infections though. Mine were always throat, and then like sinus infections. And I also had really bad asthma, pediatric asthma as a child. And the big thing to me, that should have been a huge red flag, but you know, no one knew anything, was like cleaning products would like pretty much kill me. Like
Hmm.
perfumes, all that kind of stuff. I had to be taken to the ER, I guess, when I was like 3, because I guess my mom cleaned the bathroom with Tilex, and then she tried to give me a bath afterwards, and I like my lungs completely, like my throat completely closed up. Yeah,
Oh,
and I
It's
had to be,
always mom's fault.
and so they just did it, but you know, they just think it's just can't keep Tilex, and then when anyone, they couldn't clean the house if I was there. They had to send me somewhere else or take me out of the house so that they could clean the house, because otherwise I'd get like, you know, an asthma attack, you know,
Crazy.
unless they had to clean with like vinegar and you know, salt or something like that, or you know, um, but any conventional cleaner just would completely destroy me. Um, and then yeah, a lot of throat infections, missing a lot of school, being sick like so much, and then puberty, it just got worse, you know, and the sinus infections would be, I mean, 3 to 6 times a year getting sinus infections, and having to do a course of antibiotics. And it got so bad that I think I was like 22 or something. Um, I begged the doctors to take my sinuses out. So I actually had sinus surgery, and so I have
Wow.
nothing in my sinus cavity. They removed everything,
wow.
um, and then
I might be dating myself, but I actually had my tonsils removed when I was a little kid, like 3, 4
So
years old, because they
I
had
had my tonsils removed when I was 15 because I
wow,
kept getting throat infections and they
right.
didn't know what
Wow.
else to do.
And that's kind of rare these days, right? They don't
Yeah.
do that like
Right.
they used to. Yeah.
Wait.
And
Your throat infection, did that stop after getting the tonsils out or no?
well, they did, but I just kept getting infections other places then.
All right.
Right? Like it didn't actually address the issue, right? Like I just
Right.
stopped getting them there.
Right.
I
Right.
have not had a cold since 2016. So I got a sore throat the Christmas of 2017. It was pretty mild. Allowed me to escape a lot of forced family functions and watch Netflix. And then I got another one for a couple days. I was doing a fast with Raymond or something, and I got a sore throat for like a day, but that's it since since 2016. And I was in 2016. I was using the nasal steroids because the swelling was so bad. I was taking antihistamines, and then they were giving me omeprazole or some other kind of anti, proton pump inhibitor, heartburn medication to make the antihistamines work stronger. Like I was on a drug to help another drug and stuff like that, plus the nasal steroids, plus the antibiotics and everything. Up until that point, it was like every year, a couple times a year at least. And I remember one time just before that, I'd gone in, they gave me a bunch of medication, and my head blew up like a balloon. Like the infection, the swelling was just like horrible. And the guy had said, "Oh yeah, come back, see me in a couple of weeks." And I was back in there like the next week, like 4 days later, 5 days later. He's like, "Oh, I thought you were coming. Ooh, what happened to your face?"
Oh shit.
And they did a skull series on me, and they found cysts in my sinus cavities, and they're like,
Oh.
"Well, the only way we can remove that is to cut your face open. So we're gonna put it off for a while, And that's what you're like, God, I got all this stuff going wrong, and they're gonna the only way to fix it is to cut my face open.
Yeah.
They're just like, I don't want that,
I always joke with my kids about, they'll say they have a little pain on their fingers. And then I was like, I can fix that. I'll just cut the other finger, and then you won't feel that pain anymore. And, as ridiculous as that sounds, that's kind of how our medical community does. They take out your tonsils. Of course, where's the infection going to go? It's not dealing with the root cause, right? So,
and that's what would frustrate me so much is like, even after I got diagnosed, because I got diagnosed by actually a conventional doctor. I was really lucky they even knew what they were dealing with. But, they kept giving me antihistamines and like antacids and things like that to deal with my symptoms. And I kept asking them, I was like, but why is this happening? And they would always say like, sometimes this stuff just happens. Like that was literally their answer, and I would, ask them about my like prognosis. Like, so am I just going to be sick my whole life? And they're like, maybe sometimes things just get better. We don't know why, it just all was like this
Right.
big mystery.
We're
And I
gonna
just
try and keep you alive long enough for your body to heal itself.
Just so we can get enough insurance money.
right.
We can bill you. It's
Make sure you
good.
pay your premiums.
Well, Jen, your results are better than mine because 6 weeks, I straight up, literally to the day of 6 weeks of after getting my sinuses removed, I got another sinus infection. And I was like, you guys promised that this was going to stop. And they were like, well, with some people, then they start backpedaling and all that, and they're like, so you might just be one of those people that we're going to have to cycle on and off antibiotics like every 6 weeks. They're like where I was just going to have to take antibiotics like every 6 weeks and do like a treatment and then get like 6 weeks off of them and then 6 weeks on them.
And I'm not going to say Justin doesn't like drugs, but those aren't his kind of drugs.
Oh my gosh.
We give each other a hard time all the time, so.
Zing. But and then at that point I was like, I'm done. I'm never going stepping back in the doctors again, because it was over a decade of seeing doctors. I had an ear, nose, and throat specialist. I had a neurologist, a chiropractor, and things would just only get worse, just like constantly. And then like it was to a point where it's just like I'd walk in and be like, it's a sinus infection. Give me antibiotics. And we go, well, we have to check you out and all this stuff. It's like, no, I know. And then sometimes I'd get a bad doctor and I'd be like, I need 500 milligram of amoxicillin and I need at least a 2-week cycle of it. So you need to give me enough for 2 weeks. And then sometimes I'd get a doctor that, oh, well, I don't know if I can do that or whatever. Like, well, let's just give you a week. And the next week I'd be back in like, oh, well, now it's chronic sinusitis. So now we need to do the 2 weeks. Or then they'd have to give me some horse pill antibiotic or whatever, there was some like big one that you take, for 3 days or whatever. It's just always just so frustrating and so much time. I mean, the time that I spent in urgent care, you know it's just, I mean, hours, like literally hours, and seeing, like, it was to where they knew me at the I was popular at the urgent care because I was constantly coming in, for a decade, good, if not longer, you know and just never getting a solution. Now, I wasn't as smart as you, Jen, and I didn't ask why. I think just usually when you
Well, it
have
didn't really get me anywhere, but
those sinus infections, you can't really think, and you just want it to end. And
yeah.
I was taking the Flonase, I was taking the Claritin, and the Aleve cold and sinus, and all the stuff that they would give me, and the antibiotics, I'd always take them as prescribed, all that
Yeah.
stuff. And
I remember when they took the good stuff out of the NyQuil, I'd get a really nasty cold and I was like, well, at least there's NyQuil. And then one day it didn't really work like it used to, I was like, wow, at least I used to sleep when I took this.
Yeah,
And it got wimpy.
I remember that. Yep, I remember that.
But these are really serious medications we're talking about. Like, I think so many people, like, it's so normalized to take this stuff that like one round of antibiotics as serious stuff, right? Like, I understand this now. Like, that's like a bomb going off in your body, right? And yet
Yeah.
this stuff, I mean, I've probably taken at least 20 rounds of antibiotics in my life, if not more,
Oh my
right?
God.
And like,
Sure.
how devastating that is long term to your whole ecosystem, and it's just,
Yeah.
it's not considered at all. It's so frustrating to
Well,
see.
the heartburn meds too. They used to always be the hardcore stuff was always prescription, and now it was over the counter. And I've had Bart and I have talked about this because the law used to be you weren't supposed to take it for more than 28 days, because what happens is people are, after that you're like 16 times more likely to get pneumonia, no matter how old you are.
God.
And it stops when you reduce your stomach acid, you stop digesting your food the way you're supposed to, and that somehow that malnourishment leads to people getting pneumonia like crazy. And one of them was an Nexium or something that they just this big link between it and cancer. They're pulling it off the market, and it had gone over the counter. I think it's Nexium. So yeah, there's all these side effects, and people just keep taking it. I know people take it because they smoke. People take it because they drink beer or drink wine, or they eat the wrong diet. My mother got asthma from acid reflux or GERD. She'd aspirate stomach acid in her sleep, ruined her lungs, and that eventually killed her. Took a long time, and they were putting her on. So the irony is they were giving her the antacids or the the omeprazole or something like that, so that she wouldn't get any more acid reflux when she's sleeping. But eventually she died of pneumonia because she had asthma and she was taking something that was making pneumonia far more likely. So yeah, so that's a vicious cycle that we're not aware of. And if you don't read the box and it says do not take for more than 28 days, how are you going to know? Because
Yeah.
I don't know anybody's doctor actually told them that. But
well, and a lot of them are over the counter as well. You can get really strong antacids and that stuff over the counter as
Yeah.
well. And people just, oh, I'm going to eat a burrito tonight. I got to pop my antacids, or I'm going to have some hot sauce and pop some antacids so that I don't have heartburn later. And it's just like, maybe you shouldn't be eating that burrito. Maybe, the scorching hot, what's the insane pepper or whatever?
Loki,
is yeah, maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe
yeah,
tone down on the ghost pepper. Maybe it's not
maybe nature is
necessary.
trying to kill you. Maybe
Right.
avoid them.
Right.
Well, and I think this is just an attitude that we've lost sight of. And I try to really emphasize this in my work I do with people, that if your body is giving you a symptom, it's trying to tell you something. Like, I think the Western perspective just sees like these symptoms as just like these inexplicable or like genetic things that just pop up, right?
We're barely a step above it's the devil and you're cursed. Like we're
Right.
barely like one
Yeah,
step.
it's just like the
Very
scientific
good
version
point.
of that.
Yes.
Totally.
Yes. Totally.
But it's like each symptom you're having is your body saying like, hey, something's off balance here. Like, we should address it. And I think, it's so important to start looking at your body and your symptoms in that way. And so much of the time we just see those things as like a nuisance or an annoyance, right? Instead of like
Or it's
a
just
really
you, just
compassionate message, right?
just you lead into kind of that acceptance of, well, this is just how I am. I just got the genetic, rough side, the short
Right.
end of the
Blame it on
stick.
the genes.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just unlucky. Yeah.
I'm just unlucky, it's
Yeah.
just my lot in life,
Yeah.
gotta
I
keep moving.
frequently like to say that we're all victims of bad information, and I think that's where it's.
That's what it is.
I mean, we're all when we're kids in school, they all tell us about how we were hunter gatherers, and they don't put enough emphasis on the hunting, because I'm very convinced, both from a biological standpoint, archaeological standpoint, anecdotal standpoint, that we are primarily meat eaters, and heavy on the fat. We followed around fatty animals, eating them for thousands of years, and then they started dwindling because of climatic events, and we had to move to smaller, faster game animals, and then we had started domesticating animals, and it got tougher and tougher, and then we started planting crops, and it's like, well, it's better than starving, but it's not as good as what we evolved to eat over. I say the scale of starts about 3.7 million years ago at least, because we have hard archaeological evidence that pre-humans were butchering animals. They were cutting the flesh off the bone with tools that they made specifically for that purpose. And so we know, going back then, and we know that, domesticating animals probably precedes domesticating crops, right? So, and then of course, everything within the last 40,000 years, we can do nitrogen isotopes, because you can still find collagen in fossils, and we know who ate what, and we know we were the apex predator of apex predators, that we probably, I'm sorry if my dog can hear me, we probably ate wolves. So, but at the same time, we're companions with dogs, because we're 5 times more successful at hunting, and so are they, right? And so it makes sense that we live with dogs and cats for all this time, and that's why we keep finding that these things go back farther and farther than we ever imagined, right? We keep finding more and more mammoth bones and mammoth pits. I don't know if I love filing this stuff, though. Even in Mexico here, they keep finding these giant mammoth pits where people built these traps, and they lure the mammoths into them and eat them, and they keep uncovering them everywhere, so the planet's covered with these things, where the giant, I don't know if you guys ever seen the kites where they would catch game animals. They make these giant triangles, and they drive animals into these like man-made sort of canyons. So they're
Yeah.
easy.
Yeah.
Yes,
They'll
they do
fall
that
in.
with fish. They do that on the beaches.
Yeah.
They call them kites, and it's like the tide comes in, the fish get trapped, and that's what we've been doing. We've been eating, and that's why we painted it on cave walls. We've been eating animals. We've been enjoying free range bacon, and um, you know, Fred Flintstone.
Organic and grass fed.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's it.
So Jenna, I do have a question for you.
Yeah.
Now share within your comfort level, of course. Now I am kind of curious, because you said at age 25 things really went downhill. And I'm kind of wonder if there was some kind of like traumatic event or something like that may have spurred that on, obviously within your comfort level. So I also have a master's degree in psychology, and I have treated, and I've done all that stuff too. And that's another thing I want to talk to you about. But I am curious what you think the link is there, if any, for you or
Yeah.
other people.
Well, I mean, there was some physical trauma in the sense that I mentioned I was having these recurrent infections, and I can see from like age like 23, 24 on, like that cycle kind of started speeding up, right? Where I was getting, it started actually getting into like bacterial vaginosis and like yeast infections that I was like cycling between because of antibiotics. And then I got a really bad UTI. So, and my fever spiked so high that I actually ended up going to urgent care, and they ended up giving me IV antibiotics
Oh,
because my
wow.
fever jumped so high so fast. And that I feel like was like a physiological precipitating event. I mean, my system had already been so messed up by so many antibiotics, but I think that really hit it. And that was, when that happened, I was in my second year of grad school, right? So, I mean, not necessarily like a traumatic event, but the level of chronic stress, right? When you're like school full time and internship and like getting ready to start your career and feeling all this pressure. I mean, it was a pretty, brutal time in my life. And I mean, I was a young adult, like I was drinking and like all that kind of stuff as well. So I feel like all that together, probably like my whole lifetime it had been built up, and then those were kind of the events that really sent me over the edge. But yeah, no, I think chronic stress and trauma is a huge link to this kind of stuff. Absolutely, like it all feeds into each other.
Now, do you still have UTI recurring now, or has that been gone
No,
for a
I
while?
haven't
That's
had any
great.
kind of, yeah. I mean, I still like I will get occasional little like candida or like fungal outbreaks on my skin on occasion, but nothing like
That's so
that.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were chronic before, right? Yeah, I used to be chronic UTI also, but yeah, that kind of died down. And you're right. You almost feel betrayed, like what you said, because the answer is there, and we found it that. So now tell us about your what you do exactly, and about how do you treat people now?
Yeah. So like I said, I went into the mental health field because I had, struggled with anxiety. I really wanted to help people. I wanted to understand the issue better. And I got this very psychological, social, emotional perspective, which I think there's a lot of value to. I mean, I think the events in our life do really shape us. And, what that really drew me to was understanding the effects of chronic stress and trauma. And so that kind of became my specialties. I really wanted to focus on working with trauma survivors, working with PTSD, working with people who had been under severe chronic stress, for one reason or another. And it really drew me to work around the nervous system. So it kind of drew me to this more physiological perspective on that, even though it's not really what I got in school, because I started learning about like polyvagal theory, which is like a way of understanding like how the nervous system functions on a physiological level and responds to stress and trauma. And that really fascinated me because I would see it where I would see people who we were talking about, like, the events of their childhood or their family dynamics or their emotional experience. And there was just somewhere we couldn't quite get to. There was like, some people would come in and they would like kind of vent about their problems, like stuff they'd been holding in, and then it's like they felt great and they moved on, right? But then there are other people that was just like there was something physical, like there was this physical response they were having, like the mental health issue was almost like in their body, right? And they would describe it that way, like I have anxiety that's just stuck in my body, or this apathy or lack of motivation that's just stuck in my body. And so I really wanted to figure that out. And so I started going to this like nervous system approach of understanding like physically what's happening with the nervous system when we undergo stress and trauma. But still, I felt like there was a piece missing. And it kind of all came together in my own experience, because when I started transitioning to a whole foods diet, and this was before I even like went through the whole GAPS thing or started eating really heavy meat, all stuff like that, just switching to a whole foods diet, I had almost a complete resolution of my anxiety. This was actually the very first symptom that resolved before anything else did. And that was just shocking to me, right? Because I had heard, again, I grew up in this kind of college town. Like I had heard people say like, oh yeah, nutrition can affect mental health, but I just didn't believe it. And I actually felt almost like a little insulted when people would say it. Like anyone who says that has never actually had anxiety, that's ridiculous. But then
Well, tell us about the anxiety real quick. Was it
what
a
was that?
daily thing? Was the
Oh yeah.
anxiety like a daily thing? Okay.
Yeah, I just had kind of chronic low grade anxiety from the time I was like 13, probably.
Wow.
Like as soon as I, like hit puberty, it was just kind of like I just always felt a little anxious. And it would, go up and go down, but it was pretty steady. And that was the first thing that resolved. I remember wondering actually if I was depressed, because I'd never just felt that like chill before, but I realized like no, I just don't have anxiety.
I remember a distinct memory of my anxiety being so bad in high school that walking home, I could not walk on the same street as same side of the street as another person because I felt like them looking at me or just their presence like just freaked me the hell out. So yeah,
Yeah.
just like it was, I totally know where you're coming from. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, it would just feel like energy was like buzzing in my body. Like I remember I would have to like consciously like always relax my muscles because I was just always holding this like inner
Oh,
tension.
wow.
And that just like went away and I just felt so calm. And so then it really hit me like, okay, like this is the missing piece. Like all those other things are valid, like, you know, the childhood experiences and emotional repression, and then even like the physiology of the nervous system. But what I had been missing, I realized when it comes to like understanding the physiology of the nervous system is that not only are we talking about stressful and traumatic like social interpersonal events, but we're also talking about stressful and traumatic things with like foods and toxins, right? Like those are equally as stressful to the nervous system as interpersonal events. And that's the piece that I think we're missing in the mental health field. And so that's really like where my passion is now.
You
Like,
know, do you know who Dr. Chris Palmer is from Harvard?
sounds vaguely familiar.
You'd probably enjoy his videos. He's got a couple on YouTube, and then he did one with I think it was Sean Baker and um,
Zach?
Zach Bitter. Yeah, so like you like that because he had kind of had a lot of success personally with the Atkins diet, and then he works a lot with schizophrenic patients, and he had a schizophrenic patient who wanted to lose some weight, and of course a lot of those psychiatric meds uh, put a lot of weight on people, you know, and shortens their lives. So he helped this guy do it, and then the guy's symptoms got better. It didn't, you know, necessarily outwardly cure his schizophrenia, but his symptoms got a lot better. He needed less medication. He was having a better quality of life. And he talks about how they knew all the way back in the 60s, I think it was, that they were noticing that people with psychiatric problems had higher levels of acetate in the brain and stuff like that. And then so this concept of um, insulin resistance to the brain might contribute to psychiatric issues. So certain parts of the brain actually do require glucose. They don't run on ketones. They might be able to run on acetate, or they might be able to actually fall back and ferment uh, as, certain sugars in order to make ATP. But when you have an elevated level of insulin and those cells no longer respond to it, then they're not able to absorb enough glucose to keep running. And so it seems something like that might be at play in the brain. But he's had good success with people changing their diets. So definitely look that up. We tried to get him on. Now he's been too busy to have on, but I thought it was probably one of the most profound interviews I ever saw.
Yeah, I'll look that up. And yeah, I kind of had an experience where I just started feeling like it was unethical of me to keep treating people without addressing nutrition, you know? And so I started screening people when I never really had before. I started asking them about their diet, and I couldn't believe what I was finding, you know, like this, you know, young woman with severe anxiety, it turned out was eating like, you know, a Pop-Tart for breakfast and then like a frozen dinner. And, you know, so probably like way under eating calories, not getting any nutrients, having like ridiculous blood sugar dips and spikes. And like, you know, anyone else and even like me in the past would never have realized that because that's not like normal screening questions that you have in community mental health.
And I think
So
we're all familiar with the idea of that. Oh, your blood sugar drops, you know, you won't feel good or whatever. But we don't realize that when you peek behind the curtain, that is indicative of things like insulin resistance, right? And that in itself could very well, at the very least, exacerbate or worsen psychiatric issues, if not directly drive them, you know.
So, so you've seen a good portion of the gut brain connection, then pretty much that's what you're saying. And
Absolutely.
you've totally seen where it seems more physiological than say where I guess you train some people mentally to be able to deal with their situations. And
Yeah.
then some of them you have to do physiological changes too, like as in diet, I'm assuming.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, some people I think, are actually like probably pretty healthy, right? They're coming and then they have something happen, like, they have a traumatic event happen, or they just have a lot of stress, at their work, or maybe there's like an experience they had when they were a kid that has been coming up that they need to process. And if that's really the problem, then doing our like more kind of talk therapy and like emotional release techniques should take care of it, right?
Mm.
But the issue I was having, and I'd have some people do that, I was able to cycle them through, like we address the thing and then they can move on with their lives. But some people are just these like repeat, like I'll be seeing them for years and we're just not getting to a resolution. And that's when I realized, like, okay, there's something deeper going on with those people.
Yeah, I've been exploring a lot, not just I mean, I kind of look at the insulin resistance, blood sugar sort of thing as sort of a fuel crisis in the brain, but I've also been looking at histamines for a while, but now more recently cytokines. So both of those, are associated with or cause inflammation, and of course, they're supposed to do their job, intermittently, but of course now we're starting to realize that there's a lot of chronic situations, that seem to be driving. And of course, one of the interesting topics we get into in the autistic community is head size, because a lot of autistic children have very large heads. Some of them have small heads, but a lot of them do. And they believe that that is actually caused by chronic inflammation in the head when they're developing, which
Interesting.
causes all kinds of physiological deviations while they're developing, and they become permanent, right? So
Mhm.
How hard is it to convince your clients that, hey, we might have to work on the diet or whatnot? How's that been for you?
Yeah. Honestly, I just try to start really slow with people and just kind of assess where they're at. I think a lot of people have had really bad experiences with things like nutrition and
Right.
diets and things like that. Like people have a lot of trauma around that kind of stuff, especially
Exactly.
women, but I think, everyone. And so I really try to frame it as like a health thing, like I really don't work on like weight loss, I really try to focus it on like these are the changes you need to make to give your body the building blocks to have like a healthy brain, and so I think framing it in that perspective really helps. And then I just, I'm not a fan of unnecessary restriction, right? So I always just start people with like a whole foods diet, right? Of like, let's just get out the processed food and the vegetable oils and stuff like that, and just see where he goes. And honestly, I find that a lot of people are able to like balance their blood sugar and just get more nutrients in just from doing that. I do really emphasize high protein. Like I'm a huge proponent of high protein diets for most people. That is like the one part of a whole foods diet that I'm, pretty a stickler on, of like, you can do whole foods, but you got to do high protein whole foods. And then there's some people who obviously, need something a little more strict than that to see results. But that's usually where I start people at. And I think that's a little more approachable for a lot of folks.
Now, what if they're um, insistent on their high protein being, soy and plant proteins? How do you deal with that part?
Well, I mean, I tell them that you can't be high protein. Like there's no way to get enough protein from those sources. Like,
That's great. I like how
yeah.
you do that.
So I mean, yeah, I don't make everyone cut out things like soy and legumes and things like that. I think for some people they can include it if they want to, right? Some people like the flavor of it. I don't really, but some people
Yeah,
do.
right,
Like it.
right.
But I always just say like that doesn't count towards your total protein, because you would just have to eat
Nice.
so much. So I mean, I don't really work with vegans because there's just not really anything I feel like I can do with them. Someone who will do things like dairy or eggs or seafood, like we can work with that, that's fine. But I am pretty insistent about animal sources of protein to actually get enough protein.
Are you GAP certified?
I'm not, no.
Okay.
No, I just went through it on my own.
gaps comes
I
up a
am
lot.
about to graduate. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner.
GAPS diet comes up a lot in the autistic community, and overwhelmingly what I see is there's quite a few people that are helped by it, but that leaves them wanting for a little more. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why carnivore is growing in the autistic community. So many people are getting uh, more profound results. So
Yeah, I think, that just really depends on individual factors. My sense is that the deeper healing you need to do, the more restricted you need to be, right? So, I mean, I have never been 100% carnivore. I've done a lot of really meat-based diets. I've always included some amount of plants in my diet. I've targeted that very intentionally at times. But I have made almost a full recovery doing that. Not everyone can do that, and some people wouldn't have to do it as extreme as I did in order to get results, So I think it just depends, like, how compromised your system is.
oh yeah, we see people all the time. Oh, I gave up soda and bread and I dropped 100 pounds and I feel amazing.
Sometimes that's all it takes,
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is
Yeah,
that.
and we see a lot of people in the carnivore community got here because they were very ill, and it was the
Right.
only thing that worked, right? Including vegans, and vegans often make really good carnivores because they're already really good at changing their diet and sticking to it, right? They're
Yeah.
already usually pretty disciplined people, and then they, whatever, they wind up malnourished because they didn't have enough meat, and they eat some meat and they're like, the light goes on, right? And who wouldn't respond to that? We see hear the stories all the time. People like, well, I tried a little piece of fish and boom, my brain turned back on, my sex drive came back, or I ate an egg and then I ate another egg and I couldn't believe it. I was a new person. So, you know, however we get here, I think a lot of us, large percentage of the population, as popular as just weight loss is, a lot of people got here because they were really sick and nothing else worked, including the pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
What was the time frame between you starting that whole foods diet to now?
Yeah, so I switched to a low histamine whole foods diet at the beginning of February 2017, so almost exactly 4 years ago. And
That's great.
it took me almost another year before I had pulled back enough on carbohydrates to start the intro GAPS diet. And I did that pretty solidly for about a year and a half.
And you
And
were pretty strict on that protocol?
oh yeah, I'm the type of person, I never cheat.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic. Okay.
Well, and I think it's just because I was so ill, you know what I mean? Like, I really thought I was dying. And so to me, it really did feel like a life or death thing. So once I committed to it, I was like, and I just, like I said before, I had this really deep inner sense of like, this will work. I really had that faith. And so I just, my whole lifestyle just became revolving around healing. It really changed things for me.
Yeah,
I really like what you just said right there about your lifestyle centered on healing. Like, I feel like that is just such an important point. And like the people, that was my attitude, is like, I'm going to prioritize my health over everything else.
Yes.
And I made that commitment even before carnivore, when I was even seeing the natural path and all that stuff. It's just like, whatever's going to get me to health, because when you're 20 and you're sicker than people that are 65,
Right.
you're like, what does the rest of my life look like? Like, where there, this only goes down, like, really, and just makes, employment, what does that look like? Relationships, family. I mean, can't hang out with friends because you got a migraine or something hurts, or you're going to get sick, or you're too anxious, or you're going to bleed through your clothes at the movie theaters. Just all that stress, all that, it's just crazy. And then when it comes to the talk therapy, I don't know if you've gone through extensive or some sessions, or how many sessions you've ever been through. It always helped. Like, it was nice to talk to somebody, and some therapists are obviously more skilled and better than others, and things like that. But like, once the diet has changed, I got the nutrition, it was like a switch, like the depression and the anxiety, like, no, like I walk, you know, yeah, from therapy, you'd feel good that day. You might feel good a couple of days after, a week if you're lucky, you know, and then you go back and you kind of get, refueled, remotivated and stuff like that. But once you get the nutrition, it's like that cloud is just gone. That those feelings are they're just gone. Now, don't get me wrong, like I still have occasional bout of anxiety, and I'm sure you do
Yeah.
too. That's like normal, and I think there's always going to be some level of tension. Otherwise you're not living, you're not
Right.
risking, you're not,
Right.
Progressing. But
Life
it's not
doesn't suddenly become perfect.
right,
Exactly.
exactly.
But
Well, we
But
could go ahead. Sorry.
but it becomes manageable.
yes.
And that is such a gift, like every day of like, okay, even if I get a flat tire, even if my car doesn't start, even if this deal or whatever I'm trying to work out, even if Jen doesn't show up tonight, I'm gonna be okay.
Yeah.
you know uh but whereas before something like that happens and you're crushed, you're
Mhm.
devastated, and it might take you a week to recover from it or longer depending on what it is, and then you got to call the therapist, and it may still take a while,
Yeah.
but with this, it's like you can really you actually feel resilient and
Yeah.
that you can bounce back from things and actually overcome. Whereas before, just like the next loss was, or you were waiting for the next loss, embracing at all times. And just everything just took you out. One bad day just was a nightmare, you know?
I was going to
Yeah.
draw a parallel between mental health and fitness because it's like, I think we all kind of agree that diet is at least 80%, maybe more of the fitness factor, right? Even before exercise, because it's really the diet that facilitates the exercise, right?
That's
And
right.
it's probably the same thing with mental illness or, it's like without the right diet, it's really hard to get better with or without therapy, right? And you imagine being on the wrong diet and your brain's just inflamed and has a fuel crisis and you're, doesn't matter how much work you put into it, your progress is going to be slim,
Yeah. If you're not getting the right nutrients to like build the neurotransmitters, that make you feel calm and happy, like you can talk about it all day, but it's just like the raw material is not there, and I think that's the missing piece for so many people.
Yeah, so many hormones are made from cholesterol, right?
Yeah.
Testosterone, progesterone,
Mhm.
estrogen, vitamin D, they're all modified cholesterol molecules. So
Yeah.
Jen, have you noticed an emotional component in a lot of your clients and maybe yourself also, not just mental, but actual emotional? Like, I don't know if you remember when you were in your old diet that you were much more emotional maybe, or have you noticed that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting for me because it's been a little bit of a mixed bag. Like part of what happened, I think I mentioned like my hormones turned off when I was really in acute healing, and I had like bad PMS and things like
Oh,
hormone
okay.
dysregulation before. And so, yeah, I would get very emotional, like related to my hormones, but then my hormones turned off. Right. And I had amenorrhea, like I had like no hormone cycle at all. And then I hit a point in my healing where that all started turning back on. And
Wow.
it was interesting to me because it kind of felt like I went through a little bit of like a mini second puberty, because I suddenly started having these like mood swings related to my hormone cycle again. And it almost was like if you drop a plate and it kind of does this and then it like evens out, like that's kind of what it felt like. So I actually had a period where I got more emotionally unstable again, but it was just like my hormones turning back on and like resetting. And now they're much more even and stable, and I like barely get any PMS symptoms or anything like that. But I had kind of an interesting cycle with that,
Wow.
related to hormone health.
Now, you were working with a specialist. I forgot her name. You should throw her name up there, and we should get her information and post her at the bottom. But so were you getting like regular blood tests and stuff throughout this entire process? Because a lot of us, do this blind. We're not
Yeah,
doing any
we do
blood.
it
Maybe
ourselves.
we do ketones, but we're not doing blood. No one's checking our hormones and things like that. No, I get it. It's a little bit different. We're three dudes. None of our female crew couldn't come in tonight. So what do you think? Like, did you have that kind of help? And do you think it would have been a lot more difficult without that? It would have been more guess and trial and error. Do you think, like, just the argument of not just working with you, but having a coach, having a medical professional, especially for those of us that are kind of more of a severe case? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so I mean, I did work with both a naturopath and a nutritionist throughout this experience, and I still get regular blood work with my naturopath. I still see her, you know, every 6 months or so, just to check up on things and tweak things and stuff like that. You know, I mean, I think it kind of depends what kind of person you are. I find that a lot of people get stalled in their healing journey because they feel like they don't know what's wrong, and they're like hesitant to do things or try things because they don't really know what's wrong. But I think the reality is, like, honestly, regardless of what my test results would have shown, I probably would have done similar things, right? Like, I did get like stool tests and things to find out exactly what chronic infections I had, you know, but like, I probably would have done the same thing regardless of which chronic infections it came back that I had, right? And like, I knew when my hormones turned off and when my hormones turned on. I mean, it was nice to get the blood work to validate that, but like, I could feel it. Like, I knew, right? I knew what that test result was going to say. So I mean, I think that there are just universal things you can do with nutrition and lifestyle and mindset that are going to help you no matter what the root issue is. If you're the kind of person, like Tom, you're saying you really like data, right? And I'm kind of like that too. Like, I do really like those test results. I like to know. So it was helpful for me. But you know, I think it depends, you know, what you need to support your journey psychologically.
For sure.
I will say one of the benefits, especially working with my nutritionist, Mary, who I'm actually going to be working for coming March now, is that she also has a really incredible healing story. She's been on a few podcasts recently, like with Paul Saladino and people like that, where she has shared her story. But she went through severe illness, actually much more severe than I went through even, and has made a full recovery. And so one thing that was really powerful about working with her was having like a mentor who I knew had overcome something really profound, and that really gave me the confidence that I could too. And I think honestly that's a big part of what I want to provide for people as well, is just like that. Yeah, I've been through it. Like, I was at a very low place, and I, you know, decided to really change my lifestyle, and you know, I did it. You know, and I just want to give people that inspiration that it's absolutely possible even with very severe illness.
Yeah, you know what's really funny is that in this space, before you get in this space, you believe that you're the sickest person that you know.
Yeah.
That you have everything is wrong with you. You're out of your friend group, your family, you're the most, you know, genetically disabled or something like that. What you make a story, right? Like, you just, because we all have to reason things out, you know. And then you get in this space and it's like someone like Rebecca Farmer. I don't know if you've spoken to Rebecca Farmer.
I haven't spoken to her, but I follow her on social media also. Yeah, incredible story.
To me, she gets the reward for like what she's gone through. I was like, whoa,
yeah,
that's
the biggest list for sure.
No kidding, hands
Or
down.
the survivors, anyways.
Yeah, hands down.
And survived it and everything. And I mean, we should drop a link to her story too, just because I believe everyone needs
Yeah, we
to
did a
hear
video with her not too long ago, maybe a year ago. We should probably do another.
We should have one of her back
We should
again.
have her back again. Yeah, for sure. But you know, it's like, wait, there were people, and it's just, you're so lonely when you're in that state, you know?
Mhm.
And it's like, man, if I had just met Rebecca or you or anybody else, you know, Tom, even though it was different, you know, so, you know, you just don't want to be social. You're ashamed of what you're going through. You feel like you're falling behind your peers. You know, all of that is just, it's just so stressful. And what's sad now is that now I'm going above my peers, and my peers are starting to fall apart because the stuff is starting to affect them. And it's like, why can't we all just be on the same level? Why can't, I could stop you from suffering from that or something, but you don't want to listen, and, all that kind of stuff. And that
Well,
gets frustrating.
I felt like I had no effect on the people around me, no matter what the results. And that's one of the things that spurred me on to make the videos, because I knew there would be somebody out there who would listen, probably strangers, right? But now, after probably roughly 4 years into this, if I count my keto days, I have people asking me questions, and it's like, yeah, you know what? I gave up soda. I haven't drank soda in 6 months, and it's a baby step in the right direction. But I hear feedback like, it really wasn't that hard, because we hear people all the time. It's like, oh, I just eat meat. Oh my God, I could never give up bread. That's like one of the first things they say. I mean, you're like, well, it's not really that hard. I mean, it sounds harder than it is for most people most of the time. So just by getting the word out and letting people know that sometimes these changes really aren't that difficult. And sometimes things surprise you that wind up being more difficult than you thought. But it's all on average, I think it's easier than most people think it's going to be. They just try, you know.
So I am curious, what are you eating currently? What does your diet look like? But it sounds like to me that your foundation, I would say, of your diet is no histamine or low histamine. Is there a way to do no histamine? Because I know me and Tom also struggle with histamine. So any other light you could shed on that as well. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's possible to do a no histamine diet because you release histamines by digesting food, right?
Right.
Unfortunately. But actually, I don't react to histamines in food anymore. I've completely
Really?
cured my histamine intolerance.
So like
Yeah,
even do like tomato? Like tomato, does it mess with you?
I've never reintroduced nightshades. That's one
Got
thing.
it.
Well, I did eat a bell pepper once, but for the most part, I've never reintroduced nightshades. That's not something I've tried. But like fermented foods and like jerky and like canned fish, like smoked fish, like none of that bothers me at all anymore.
Yeah, jerky doesn't
So
bother me.
Yeah, jerky doesn't bother me either. Neither does
oh,
smoked
interesting.
fish or any of that. So
Yeah.
I didn't even know there was histamines in jerky, honestly. When I think of histamines, I guess in our community we kind of think of ground beef that's been sitting in the fridge for like 3
Oh
days.
yeah.
Then you
Yeah,
cook
I used to have to freeze all my leftovers, and now I'll eat something that's been in the fridge for 4 days, no problem.
Cool.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, I definitely that was something that really shifted through doing the intro gaps diet for me. And I did it low histamine. Like a lot of people start like with fermented food on that diet, but I did it low histamine until I could tolerate it, and it took me about 3 months on that protocol before I started being able to introduce like things like avocado, like things that are a little bit, and having like leftovers the next day, like stuff like that. But now I mean my diet's really flexible now. I've reintroduced a lot of things. I actually am right now experimenting with a little bit of higher carb. I'm actually eating like 100 to 150 grams of carbs a day right now, just as an experiment. I have some pancreatic insufficiency, and just playing with my like hormone, like the effects on my hormones as well. I'm just kind of playing with that right now. But
What kind of carbohydrate do you eat?
yeah, so anti-nutrients are something that I think are really important to keep in mind when you're picking and choosing the plant foods that you're eating. So I try to be mindful of that, as much as you can. So I do a lot of things like sweet potatoes, parsnips, some fruit like apples and pears, plantain, cassava, things like that. So I think the important thing is like I don't think that you should focus on plants as sources of nutrients, right? Like I'm specifically eating plants because I'm playing with getting higher carbohydrates in my diet just to see what the effect is, but I'm not like relying on those as my nutrient sources. Like I'm still eating very high protein and a lot of meat, some lower fat meats because I'm eating higher carb, but I'm still focusing on like animal sources for my nutrients and then just playing with carbohydrates for other effects.
Have you ever tried white rice?
I have tried white rice. Yeah. Yeah. I don't really eat that a lot just because I'm a little worried about like nutrient depletion that can result from eating a ton of that. But I have tried that. I've actually tried like lentils and things like that, like prepared very, very well to get as many of the anti-nutrients out as possible. That's been fine. I actually haven't at this point reintroduced anything that I've had a problem with except for oatmeal. So that, I think the level of anti-nutrients was just too high for my body to handle. So I won't be
We
trying that
love
again.
making fun of Wilford Brimley because first he sold us oatmeal, then he sold us diabetes supplies.
Totally. But yeah, no, I check my blood sugar. Like I try to be mindful of that. And I think if you're going to transition into eating higher carb, you do have to be really mindful of that, because I was in ketosis for years, right? And so my body was not used to running on sugar when I started transitioning to experiment. And so I did it very slowly and intentionally and made sure my blood sugar stayed stable.
So when you check your glucose, when and what kind of numbers are you looking for?
Yeah, so I mean, my fasting glucose in the morning is usually in the 80s or early 90s. And after like an hour or two after eating, it usually doesn't get over 130 or 135. Occasionally, we'll see it jump into the 140s, and that's when I know maybe I overdid it a little bit. I don't like to see it get over 140. But yeah, so I'm just mindful about that. And honestly, again, it's one of those things, like I can actually feel when my blood sugar gets a little too high. Like I'll feel just like a little bit buzzy, or something. And so, the actually looking at it on the meter is helpful to like validate that, but I can feel it. And so it's just like, okay, I ate a little too many like carbs at once in that meal, or maybe the type of carbs, didn't work for me. But it's interesting. I have been, like I said, I have some pancreatic insufficiency, so giving it a little bit of a break from digesting fat has actually felt really good for my digestion. And my hormones actually, I think, got even more balanced doing it. And so, I don't think carbohydrates are evil. I just think they need to be used with intention when you're healthy enough to handle them. Like I would not have healed if I had not taken away carbohydrates for an extended period of time. But at this point, I'm healthy enough. It's been really interesting experimenting with a little bit and seeing the effects.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure every individual has a different threshold for carbohydrates, or
Yeah.
just about every type of plant food. Like, some people can eat nightshades every day. It doesn't seem to affect them. And some people,
Totally.
a very small amount is detrimental to their health.
Yeah.
And, you were talking about anti-nutrients, and have you seen that study where they fed people oysters and then measured their serum zinc levels?
With the beans and the
And then
corn and
they do
yeah.
it with black beans and corn and stuff. Yeah, it's very dramatic, right? But if
Mm-hmm.
you ate black beans once a month, probably wouldn't matter, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
like you smoked a cigarette once a month, probably wouldn't matter.
Well, if you're healthy enough, right? Like I feel
Yeah.
like I'm at a point in my health where, I can do that a little bit, and maybe the carbohydrates are giving me some other benefits right now.
Maybe.
But
Yeah.
again, like that would not have been the case even like 2 years ago.
Right. Yeah, I'm all in favor of experimenting. These guys know I love experiments. So I'm the curiosity switch never gets turned off. So
Yeah.
That's how we got here, right? I mean, why are we going to shame or get rid of the same mechanism that brought us here in the first place? So what are your symptoms? Like how do you, like I've tried introducing things. So I've had like a little over the summer, I had like some grapes and like some cantaloupe, and like I got a bad stomach ache, and then like my head started hurting, so I was kind of migrainey. Coffee, off and on kind of goes, get good, get kind of bad. Um, the so I've tried like a couple of different things. So what are your symptoms, and like how do we know we're like, okay, you're just one of those people that unfortunately truly is cursed, and you really got to stay away from the plant foods, versus someone, and maybe it all just is experimentation, or like, is there a period of time where it's like you can eat that stuff in very, very, very low moderation, you know? And
Yeah.
how did you, and was it because like your doctors or the person you're working with was like, like you keep talking about the pancreatic deficiency. Did that come up? And she's like, okay, well, to do this now, you know, was it more that, or were you like, there's got to be a way I could do even better? Like, was that the
Yeah.
drive?
Yeah, totally. So it's complicated.
Right.
But I think that especially with the histamine, some of that is so like in the nervous system, you know what I mean? Of like your nervous system being overreactive, that there were times when I was in that acute healing phase early in GAPS that I would kind of push through very small histamine related symptoms. Like I would get like little hives on my face or a little flush in my cheeks. And I would just kind of like try to have the mindset like, no, it's okay. Like I can handle this. My body can handle this. Right. And try to kind of use that positive mindset to like push through it a little bit. And I would end up being able to then tolerate that food. So I think sometimes mindset is a piece of it, of being, but only with more minor reactions, right? Like if I had a really big histamine response, that's not smart to push through. But little ones, I think there can be a little bit of nervous system retraining that happens, which I definitely found. I find that if I eat too high fat, too much, I will start to get digestive discomfort. And even taking supplements like ox bile or pancreatin, sometimes it just gets to a point where it's not enough and I will have some digestive upset that is not like related to a particular food. It's like just when I get my fat too high for too long, right? And so I would really like to be able to like be flexible and eat as much fat as I want. So I kind of had this thought of like, well, maybe if I just really give it a break and just kind of with the resources my body has now, with like the level of health my body has now, like really try to give it an opportunity to heal. And so that was kind of my idea with pulling back on the fat for a while just to experiment. But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of fine tuning stuff. I mean, honestly, like having some a little like digestive discomfort occasionally is like so far from like where I was before, you know what I mean? But yeah, it's just always like, now that I see what's possible, it's like, well, okay, like maybe I could do even better, So I just keep playing with it.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Just one more question. Are you also focused on like plastics and environmental toxins and things like that too? Okay, so you do cover that as well. That's very cool.
Yeah, no, I think that's a huge part of a lot of people's health journey. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's good. It's good that you're so open minded and like to experiment. I think to some extent, whenever possible, we should all treat ourselves like guinea pigs.
Yeah.
Nothing better than knowing yourself, right?
Yep.
Well, I think Ray has to go pretty soon. Did you guys want to wrap it up, or do you want to keep it going for a little while?
Yeah, I'm good if you guys are.
I
Yeah,
think we covered a lot. I think
we
that
cover a lot. Yeah, people's
Yeah.
heads are going to be spinning. So
I'm sure you'll be back. We would love to have you back.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Do you want to
this
do
was great.
any plugs, Jen? Where people can find
Let's
you?
see. Yeah, so I mean, you can visit my website, wholebodyhealingeugene.com. I am accepting clients. I do have a wait list right now. So I do encourage people if they want to like start working on this stuff right away. I do have a couple of like self-guided courses available on my website. It's called Nervous System 101. It's kind of like a holistic, comprehensive, like, let's start like resetting your nervous system. And the other one is called Whole Foods Diet for Nervous System Health. So it's just kind of, probably most of your listeners are way beyond this, but it's just kind of an intro, like how do you kind of dial in and just at least start focusing on whole foods for nervous system health is like a first step. So those are self-guided courses I have. And then, yeah, I'm pretty active on Instagram, Whole Body Healing with Jen. So yeah, I'd love to hear from folks.
That's really cool. We love talking to different people and get different resources because, hey, we get it. Not everyone's going to go carnivore. There's people that are never going to want to go keto, but we can be like, hey, you're suffering. Here's Jen. Here's the nervous system. It's whole foods. You can still eat most
That's
of the
right.
things you're still eating. just, you know, there's a few stipulations, just not the Doritos or the Coke. Basically,
Eat the real food.
eat
Yeah.
the real food, which is cool. I have no issue with that. I don't think any of us here have any issue with that. And it's just like anything I can throw at people to move them in that direction of health, I feel like is always a fantastic resource. And why not? You know?
Yeah.
So
Totally
thank you
agree.
for having that as an availability.
Yeah. Make sure you email me all your links, and I'll put them in the show notes.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that.
So, all right. Well, we'll wrap it up then. I want to thank everybody for watching. Make sure you leave us comments, questions, compliments for me. Complaints go to Justin. So if Justin doesn't respond, then send them to Ray. So, but yeah, send links out to people of this video, to people who might enjoy it or benefit from it. You know, give us the thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed. Hit the little bell so you get notified. And until next time, eat lots of meat, feel better, and whatever you do,
Don't fall down the carb hole.